Okay, so I think we can slow down with the new releases in terms of the modern prog stuff. I need to take some time for myself here. Holy jeez. But let's dive into the next one. High road will save us. The Flower King, Manifesto for an Alchemist by Roine Stolt. So we shouldn't really need an introduction for Roine Stolt at this point. He is the Swedish multi-instrumental solo artist, guitarist aficionado of the retro modern prog era, getting his start kind of in the same era of the original progressive rock movement. He put out a few albums way back when, but it wasn't really until the mid-90s when his claim to fame finally came to fruition with The Flower King. From that, it launched the career of The Flower Kings, where we've got one of the greatest retro prog bands in existence, really. His latest endeavors include The Inventions of Knowledge with John Anderson from Yes, as well as The Sea Within, pairing up with a lot of really great modern proggers. Unfortunately, the output of Roine Stolt within the past, I guess even decade, has been less than stellar for me. His work with John Anderson and The Inventions of Knowledge was a hit and miss, a mixed grab bag of music. I love the first half, the second half not so much. And The Sea Within really disappointed me this year. It really did not do what I was kind of hoping for it to do. When I came into the Manifesto of an Alchemist, kind of the second Flower King album, I didn't come with a whole lot of expectations. I didn't come all that excited for it. And unfortunately, I have to say my expectations were kind of met. I don't know, I feel like the time, I don't want to say the time has passed because I feel like Roland still has a lot of really great music within him, but I feel like this kind of a project is past for him. The album itself is comprised of about 10 tracks, coming into just under 70 minutes. Like, it's over an hour and 10 minutes, and the first thing right off the bat is this album is way too long. There's a lot of filler on this album. There's a lot of tracks that really don't need to be here. Even the album as a whole feels more like an obligation than anything else. Like, it doesn't feel like anything new is being brought up. There's not a whole lot of really great, like, passionate moments on here. Like, within some of Roland's past works, especially his solo works within, like, Wall Street Voodoo, there was a lot of passion being driven behind some of this music. Like, there was something that he wanted to do, there was something that he wanted to say, and most of the tracks on here feel as though they're more of like an obligation to kind of like almost complete a contract or something, like to oblige a contract. Now, the musicianship. I want to talk about some of the praises of this album, because the musicianship found on this album is stellar. Roland, as always, is amazing on the guitars, and he's actually dipping into some other areas as well. He's tackling some keyboards and synths, he's doing some bass, and he's even trying some ukulele as well. And in this kind of experimentation of music, it's a fun treat. It's fun to hear him stretch his legs in some of the other aspects. And one of my favorite drummers of all time, Marco Miniman, is on drums throughout the entire album. And this... It shows how Marco is an amazing studio drummer, in that unless I was told, I would have never really noticed that it was him behind the drum kit. Like, some of his signature sounds are there, but because he's being more of a studio drummer, it doesn't feel as though his signature is like prominent as it was on some of his other works that he's been doing. Rob Townsend on flute and saxophone, and his work in, say, the 9th song of 6:30 Wake Up, as well as the sax solo within Rio Grande. Both of these are pretty good. I like his use. He's worked with the Flower Kings in the past, and I like how he's used that essence as well. So the overall musicianship is, I mean, it is great. I mean, these guys have been at it for quite a while, so it is kind of masters of their craft, playing in their own domain. But that's really the only praise that I have. I do want to talk about my favorite track, which is The High Road. And The High Road only really has, like, the only glimmer of like great music within it, like a piece that I got really excited for, and it was right at the halfway mark, about like the 5 minutes within the 12-minute stretch, where there's this moment of music within the guitar work that is played and then is reprised really quickly afterwards. And it's that moment where I'm like, wow, we've got some really, like, there's a nugget of gold surrounding this. I don't want to say desert of sound, but there's like that diamond in the rough that I was kind of hoping for within this album. But that's really the only like real glimmer of like great music where I actually stopped. I'm like, all right, we've got something here. But it is in the center of the track, and the rest of the track is, I mean, kind of ultimately forgettable. And the album does have 3 purely instrumental tracks. We've got, Rio Grande, we've got 6:30 Wake Up, and I want to say the other one is Z-Pons. I think it's Z-Pons. These 3 tracks are just purely instrumental, and it kind of harkens more back to like Roland's traditional solo stuff, and I enjoyed those when I was in it, but once they left I was just kind of meh. The rest of the tracks on here just kind of service, and there's a lot of fat, and as I mentioned, this album is way too long. They probably should have shaved off at least 20 minutes worth of music and really tightened up that remaining time that they had on it. Yeah, so overall, I didn't want to go too deep within this review because there's not a whole lot to talk about. Like, the hardest album to talk about is a boring album, and this album, even though if you're coming into this album as a fan of retro prog, as a outsider to retro prog, it's going to be enjoyable, but ultimately it's going to be forgettable. And that's my ultimate rating on this album, is that it is ultimately forgettable. Like, it's not one that I would skip entirely, because the album never really gets on my nerves. It never really gets to a point where I'm like frustrated with it. The music itself is fine, but it is just serviceable because it doesn't feel like it's all that inspiring, all that innovative, and all that exciting. So yeah, that's about it for the Manifesto of an Alchemist, The Flower King, or I guess The Flower King, the Manifesto of an Alchemist by Roland Stolt. What did you guys think about this? I know that this album has been pretty like exciting, or people have been expecting this for a while. So what did you guys think about it now that it's out? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out. I mean, if nothing else, it's made me want to go back and listen to a whole bunch of the Flower Kings albums.